Bryan Ferry has been a very familiar voice for more than 50 years as the co-founder of Roxy Music and as a solo artist and songwriter. When Roxy Music first appeared on Top of the Pops in 1972, millions of viewers suddenly saw something new, an extravagantly dressed band featuring an early synthesizer, an oboe, and Bryan leading from an upright piano wearing a sparkling black and green jacket. In the words of one critic, this one definitely arrived from planet Mars. It was a bold early statement, launching a career which has produced 24 studio albums and numerous international hits. Bryan's most recent release, Retrospective, draws on his deep back catalogue and includes a new version of Dylan's 1965 song, She Belongs to Me. Well, no Bob Dylan in your choice today, Bryan, but you have brought us jazz with Charlie Parker, Mahler, Elgar, Prokofiev. But I think we're going to start with a Stabat Mater. Why this?
Well, I like the voice of James Bowman, the countertenor. I like voices up there, and it's such a beautiful sound. And a great old friend of mine loved James Bowman's voice, and so I always think of my friend Jeremy when I hear this, and it's beautiful singing.
It's a very beautiful sound, isn't it, singing in the falsetto? And it has a kind of analogy to quite a lot of pop singing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, probably the first music I ever heard or ever listened to was a vocal group called the Ink Spots. When I was 5 years old, my Auntie Enid used to play it to me endlessly, a bunch of 78s, which I still have, actually. The lead singer had a wonderful high voice. They were a great influence on Elvis Presley, actually, the Ink Spots.
Fascinating that there are these connections between two art forms that lots of people think are miles apart, but I don't think they are, really.
It's all connected, really, I think.
It's either good or bad.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is pretty good. It's amazing the way he uses those suspensions, one note clashing against its neighbour and then the neighbour dropping away.
It's very haunting, the whole thing. It's so beautiful. It's so precise and refined and delicate, and I think it sounds great.
And the combination of those two textures, the soprano and the countertenor, which also kind of half blend and half sort of have a friction.
Sort of dissonance type thing, which, it's great.
We heard part of the Stabat Mater by Pergolesi, performed by James Bowman and Emma Kirkby, with the Academy of Ancient Music conducted by Christopher Hogwood. Bryan Ferry, tell me a little bit about your early life. You grew up in the village of Washington outside Newcastle?
Yeah, sort of pit village.
And your father was a ploughman. It sounds very romantic, but it's very hard work.
He was brought up on a farm on the side of Penshaw Hill, which is this local landmark with a copy of a Greek Doric monument on top, called Penshaw Monument, and you can see it for miles around. And he lived on a farm, and it was very primitive, no electricity.
So was he ploughing with a horse?
He loved horses, he ploughed with horses, And then a few years after he married my mother, she sort of dragged him a couple of miles away to the local village, Washington, where he could work with horses but underground in the colliery there. So he looked after the pit ponies. And he was a great gardener, and he didn't really listen to music at all. But he listened to nature, to birds. He was always out in the open growing amazing vegetables, like they do up there.
And your mother was quite outgoing, vivacious?
She was vivacious, Polly. Everybody seemed to like her and full of life. And my dad was very quiet, and they were a very good combination, really. Yin and yang,
And she would take you and your two sisters to the cinema?
Oh, yes. She made sandwiches and tea for the projectionists in the local cinema, which is kind of a bit like Cinema Paradiso, that movie, where the projectionists gave us all free seats. And they were kind of very hard seats, kind of wooden seats, but it was something, and that's where I saw my first films, which cunningly leads us to the next track, I think.
Yes, your next music comes from a film.
Yeah. I think it's amazing when music combines with strong visual images. It's a beautiful song, I think, and there have been so many great versions of Dancing in the Dark. This is the MGM Orchestra playing in the film The Bandwagon, starring the wonderful Fred Astaire and Sid Charisse. This wonderful scene in the movie where they're walking in Central Park and they're just getting to know each other and they break into this most beautiful dance. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
Every movement is so elegant, isn't it? Even when they're just walking on.
It's spellbinding. Yeah, from start to finish, it's perfection, I think.
Dancing in the Dark from the 1953 film Bandwagon, performed by the MGM Studio Orchestra. Does that take you back to those hard benches?
It really does.
Did you respond also to the glamour of that? I mean, Astaire sported a natty pair of burgundy and white spectator derbies.
Yeah, he was always impeccably dressed, Astaire. And I actually like his voice as well as his great dancing. It was kind of soulful. I think he meant what he was singing, and I think he was aware that he didn't have the vocal equipment, but he made the most of it, and that's the great thing. It happens with a lot of singers I hear. It's the feeling that's the most important thing, I think.
Was there music at primary school?
Primary school, maybe the odd triangle one would hit us. And we had to march into lessons to kind of Frederick Sousa type band music. So there were a lot of children. I think there were 50 in my class, and a wonderful teacher, Miss Swaddle, who we were all terrified of, but she was a marvellous teacher and very inspiring.
I think you used to earn money on a paper round, which you would spend on records.
Yeah, that's right. First of all, there were 78s, and then I remember I saved up to buy my first EP. On the paper round, I used to deliver all the, as well as the newspapers, the music magazines. Melody Maker, which wrote about jazz and blues. I kind of became very keen on, and I read about this guy Charlie Parker, and in the local record store at weekends, you'd select a record and ask if you could go and hear it in a booth, and I saved up, I think it was 11 and sixpence, to buy my first EP. It was called The Magnificent Charlie Parker, a great record. And I learned kind of every note of that record. Played it again and again.
Well, it's Charlie Parker we're going to hear.
And so, he just amazed me with his virtuosity. He really excited me, and I thought, this is incredible. And I still think it's incredible. I chose a track from Charlie Parker with strings, which some Charlie Parker purists didn't like that because he was with an orchestra. But it was one of his favourite records, and I love the counterpoint of this string section, very good players in New York, and him soaring over the strings with his saxophone, just endlessly inventive, beautiful playing.
It's pretty terrific, isn't it?
He never played a wrong note, Charlie Parker.
And he had some fantastic musicians as well as the strings, like Buddy Rich on drums,
That's
no
right.
less.
And Stan Freeman on piano.
Yeah.
Really great session players.
So that music really excited you. Did it make you think, I'd love to be doing something
the
like
energy
this?
That was so restless and kind of adventurous, and I loved it. And it was magical to me.
One way you were able, Bryan Ferry, to sort of let off steam when you were young was cycling, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. I went through phases where I was really keen on one thing or another, and cycling, the Tour de France, I loved reading about that, and now I still, every year, watch it. It seems so exotic, cycling, international and glamorous to me.
And you had a job in a tailor's shop called Jackson's, didn't you?
I did, yeah, on the high street. It's all coming out now. I had to write down the measurements and sometimes advise people, and I was maybe 16, and advise them, how their suit should look that they were ordering and stuff. It was fun.
Did you actually have to put a tape measure around people's waists?
No, I never got that.
You weren't responsible enough for that.
No.
Just writing it down.
No, I was just a highlight. It's great when you're young to work with people and you meet all sorts of characters. And I used to work in the local steel factory as well in the summer, and that was fun as well. They sort of send you to get a left-handed rake or something. That's I've always been teased.
Do you think your love of tailoring and looking great came possibly from those days?
Well, it came from lots of things. From Charlie Parker, all the jazz players dressed great, very cool suits and ties and so on. Fred Astaire, of course, Gene Kelly, and all these great dancers in movies. And then all the film stars, they always wore good hats and suits and coats.
But of course, this was at the time of Teddy Boys, wasn't it? Too?
It was, yeah. For a while, I hung out with a few at the local pool hall. Yeah, it was quite interesting. I saw so many different kinds of people growing up, And then when I got to university, then I met other artists, people like myself who wanted to do creative things.
Until then, had you had many opportunities to see live music?
Yes. When I was 9, I saw Chris Barber's Jazzmen, and he had a banjo player in his band called Lonnie Donegan who popularized a lot of American blues music through skiffle. It was the skiffle phase. Songs like Rock Island Line. Leadbelly was one of the great voices that I heard, with the yearning, a longing. It was haunting, like the first track we played here. It's haunting to me, and it takes you into another world,
It's so interesting that the things that influenced you at this time ran on both tracks, as it were, the classical and the popular music. Because you saw your first opera when you were about 16.
Yeah, it might have been even a bit earlier. It was La Bohème at the Theatre Royal in Newcastle, and I went on my own. I seem to remember I was wearing a white trench coat. I think I was pretending I was Humphrey Bogart or something. And I remember being in tears. I was very moved by it, yeah. It was a moment. That was the first bit of classical music I'd ever seen. That was thrilling to me,
Well, your next piece of music is also a tearjerker in some ways because it comes from the 4 last songs by Richard Strauss.
It's thrilling, and it's a voice that I love, Elizabeth Schwarzkopf. I think she has a wonderful quality in her voice, and it's very authoritative, and there's a great kind of dignity in this music, I think. But it's swirling, it's got a lot of things going for it, and I think it's marvellous.
Gorgeous, isn't it?
It's just a great last note, isn't it?
Yeah. It's almost like the equivalent in song of the elegance of Sid Charisse and Fred Astaire.
Yeah, it's all connected.
We heard Frühling, Spring, from the 4 last songs by Richard Strauss, performed by the great Elizabeth Schwarzkopf with the Berlin Radio Symphony Orchestra, conducted by the equally great George Szell. Bryan Ferry, you loved art, history and literature, and while in the 6th form at Washington Grammar, I think you starred in a Shakespeare play.
I thought I'd buried that one. Yeah, I was Malvolio in Twelfth Night. Great starring moment for me. Yeah, it was very scary being on stage. I used to sometimes read in the annual carol service we'd have at the church as well, but being on stage and doing a soliloquy, it was just too scary for words. I don't understand how I ever did that.
Yeah, but on the other hand, maybe there was an element of the adrenaline that became addictive.
Maybe, and that was the first time I guess heard applause. And it's a good drug.
I think those of us that had the opportunity to do drama and things at school were lucky, really, because it does give you that experience.
Oh, yeah, right. Sometimes you have to be pushed into it, and you need a teacher who's going to force you and make you try, and sometimes good things happen. I was very lucky to have great teachers. Mrs. Hope, the history teacher, and Mr. Oliver, the man who taught English. He was really good, and he'd been to Oxford, and he wore a gown. He was quite proper and had a wonderful voice and encouraged us to try and speak with received pronunciation, which was the thing. And the teacher that took me under his wing was Bob Stapleton, the art teacher, and he really helped to prepare me to go to university to study art.